But using strong headlines, especially on mobile, is critically important. And I think obviously you know the difference between like clickbait headlines and then something like BuzzFeed, which is because they're digital native, mobile native, they're writing short, great headlines.
Yeah, I was just curious, is there like any statistics about, I guess the percentage of people who actually leave like the front, the opening page or the front page of a mobile website? Because I know on New York Times, I mean, they have sections for everything, like sports, national security, but I feel like, I mean, like me and my parents, I know it's kind of like in the morning when you're eating breakfast, you look at the front page, you read the feature articles, and you're done.
Right.
And like nothing else seems
Right.
to really get any traffic.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. And typically with analytics, it's reported as an exit rate. I know in my last job, we had an exit rate of 80%, which means that 80% of people who came to our front page then left without seeing anything else. I can't speak for the rates of other news organizations, but what I will tell you is that most news organizations have now reached a point where a majority of their traffic comes outside of their front page. So who here goes to like literally WashingtonPost.com or NewYorkTimes.com or the front page of a website? Okay, you're in a minority. Most people are finding the articles that they're reading and such through Facebook links, Twitter links, Instagram links, which is all part of the dark web, which is a term that gets used because that data cannot be tracked. And separately, email newsletters, where else can you find things online?
News applications.
Yeah, application, yes, thank you. News apps, so Washington Post news app generates a lot more of their, I shouldn't say a lot more of their traffic, but people coming to their traffic digitally would come more likely to the Washington Post news app than it would through going to WashingtonPost.com. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So most people are not entering news publications or specific articles through the front page. Yeah.
When did you mean by the data cannot be tracked through those?
Oh yes, dark web. So dark web is just kind of like a term that people use, journalists specifically, to group for the subset of analytics that can't be tracked very easily. Facebook and Twitter, Instagram don't give you a lot of information in terms of, let's say I publish an article. Grad school class meets for the first time today, right? And I can see that this big chunk of it came from somewhere, Facebook maybe, but I can't get any more specific than that. Whereas typically with analytics, I can tell you that like, not only did you view it from a desktop computer, but it also came from a desktop computer in or around American University, around this time of day, et cetera. So like the information and analytics that is coming from Facebook and Twitter that they allow you to see is very minimal. So some people are just calling it dark web in a way that's like, there's no lights here, like you can't see what's going on. And you might hear about that a lot, like people, there's this kind of constant tension between journalists and Google, Twitter, Facebook in terms of the amount of information that gets passed between them. So that's a frustration point, is that Facebook is in charge of, or is home to a lot of the traffic, but isn't giving us a lot of statistics. Is that kind of an answer? Okay, great, that kind of did my job. Front load your content. I can get a better answer for you too. Front load your content. This means putting all your good stuff up top. You already do this in journalism just by nature of inverted pyramid, right? Writing a strong lead. That gets the essence of the story up top. But you also have to do this even more with mobile publishing, because people don't want to scroll so much, right? They want to just be able to see something and know that they're interested in it. BuzzFeed does this really well, I think, by adding this. It's not really a lead so much as I don't know, it's part of their deck, right? So they have a headline, and then they tell you a little bit about it before you even get to the story. I think they do it well anyway. So then I can make an informed decision about whether I want to keep scrolling. But I have a feeling that if they did testing with this, oh, it's just the story itself.
I missed a flight at LAX on
Did
Sunday
you?
night
Because of
it
Zorro?
was ridiculous, yeah. They closed like the whole highway leading up to LAX for like 3 hours.
Oh my God, I'm
I've
so
never
sorry.
seen something shut down like that, and it was over the Zorro
That's
concert.
really crazy. That's
shut
so
down
nice.
LA.
But I would click on the story. And
Yeah.
I did. Yeah, I think they're doing well with front loading their content in terms of getting interesting stuff up top to get you to scroll. And what I was gonna say is that I bet if they showed you testing with this, in terms of, let's try it with and without this kind of summary sentence, I bet what you would see is that without the summary sentence, you would get less traffic to the, you might get the same traffic to the piece, but less engagement in terms of time spent with the piece. Does that make sense? Okay. And last but not least, use short paragraphs. So online, especially on a mobile device, by the time you squish your screen like this, one sentence looks like a whole paragraph. Here's after the story, on this BuzzFeed story. This first paragraph is one sentence. It looks like a paragraph because it ends up looking on a mobile device. You need to give the eye room to breathe, right? People don't want to see. Have you ever jumped into a story and it was like very little breathing room and you just got scared? I keep stepping in this weird red box.
Would you write the story entirely differently for the online BuzzFeed? So that, because I feel as though when you blow that out, it's going to look like, you know, one line, and then that's not going to be visually appealing on the flip side.
You know what? Let's take 1 minute and look at this story online. I believe they do. I believe they do not write separate versions of this story. What is this called? LAX turns RO.
No, so it doesn't look
Same
like
story, right?
Yeah.
You know how they get around that? Is because
They squish their column.
they have a max width
Yeah.
on the column. I don't know why I'm not allowed to do this, but it's weirding me out. So that's another part of web design, which is, I forget the exact term of it, but how long are your lines? How wide are your lines for text? And there's some data there in terms of it should be longer than whatever percentage of the screen. So they have put a maximum width on their text column in order to keep their paragraphs kind of together. And you can see that it doesn't look like what you were describing in terms of just one sentence.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Okay, what is audience engagement? Does anyone have some ideas? Yeah.
It's like people commenting or like sharing your content, so like interacting with the content in some way. So it could be sharing it on Twitter or sharing it on Facebook or leaving a comment or.
Yeah, definitely. What else?
Yeah, I've heard the term clickbait. I don't know if that's the same sort of.
That's a part. I mean, clickbait, I would say, is a strategy of audience engagement. One I don't necessarily agree with, but yeah, part of it. So essentially, how are you getting traffic to your content? How are people commenting on it, sharing it? I would say, any other thoughts? I would also say, in terms of analytics and data, it is also how long are people staying on your content. If it's a video, how long are they watching the video? There's also some ways to measure, you know, how long are they looking at a particular photo, etc. So time spent with your content as well. And then thinking about it more broadly, it's a strategy in terms of how are you building a relationship with your audience. So is it a relationship in which you can comment on things and you're encouraged to share things? Are you encouraged to stick around and watch things? Have you optimized your content for the platform? So if it's Instagram, it's probably going to be a more artistic photo than something that you would just throw up on Snapchat, right? Because that tends to be just a little more in the moment and less curated, less editorialized. Meeting your audience where they are. That's another part of audience engagement as well. So if you found that you have a growing audience on Facebook Live, being able to meet them there. Or if you found that your audience for some reason doesn't have a lot of access to smartphones, then meeting them through SMS and text messaging. There isn't one particular route that you can achieve audience engagement. The way that I tend to think about it more lands in the pocket of new media, emerging platforms, and getting people to engage with your content in different ways. That's how I tend to think about it. But I think it starts with building a relationship with your audience. And to really think about like what is the most important thing that we're trying to achieve. So if we have election coverage and we want to do a Snapchat story for it, what are we really trying to achieve by doing that? And then work backward, that's the goal, and then what are we trying to do to achieve that goal and work backward from that? Just some quick tips for audience engagement. Part of it is always experimenting. Don't be afraid to fail fast, move on. A lot of these platforms, especially when Snapchat Stories first came out and it was only available to publications and weird like brands, you saw some people doing some really crazy things on it that maybe did work, maybe did not work. But experimentation is part of that strategy. And also that your audiences on different platforms are going to be different. You all know that because I know most of you probably use a lot of these platforms. So you know that like the way that you use Twitter is different than the way that you might comment on something on Instagram. And the content that you're putting in those places is different too. This graph just shows the how digital news outlets are moving beyond their typical environment. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, I think, and Snapchat, we've kind of talked about that. Newsletters and podcasts, just another touch point where you can find audiences and engage with them, right? So these are all different platforms and they each come with their own strategy for engaging with an audience. Okay, so we're gonna hit pause on that because I'm gonna come back to those things since that's where we're gonna finish up for the assignment you have today. So hitting pause on that, we're gonna talk about data journalism real quickly, email newsletters, podcasting, and then we'll come back to the fun social stuff, okay? So what is data journalism then? Answers. No one knows what data journalism is? Surely you've all interacted with data journalism in some way. Yeah, Kelly, right?
Excuse me?
I said Kelly, right?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I haven't been doing a good job. I'm supposed to be like learning your names.
It's Kelly, and I guess data journalism would be when you get a lot of information, maybe you're getting it from another source, like a company or something, and you're finding the story.
Yeah, definitely. And if we think about how it looks, it could be a traditional text CAR story. Computer assisted reporting is what CAR stands for. That's where you're thinking about. Anyone see Spotlight?
Yeah.
Okay, so so Spotlight, the movie about the Spotlight team at Boston Globe, who then uncovered the whole Catholic scandal. Okay, that whole thing. That's your more like traditional car story. Although, did they use computers in the movie? I don't know. They showed like
the scene where she has to like go through. They make it look very easy.
Yeah. They definitely make it look very easy. It's funny what a montage will do to really speed up the time it takes. That's your more kind of like traditional data journalism, right? Where you have like a huge massive spreadsheet of something and you're like, there's gotta be a story in here and let's hunker down for the weekend and figure it out, right? But data journalism could also be an interactive graphic or an app that you create. Data journalism could be a newsroom tool that you're building for other reporters. At Vox, one of my colleagues built a tool for their newsroom that allowed his colleagues to very easily drop in what the photo was and what the headline was for easy shareable social content. You know how Vox does those like really cool photos where it's like this big gorgeous photo and like an amazing like headline just written over it? So that's hard to create if you don't know how to use Photoshop and want to do it manually, or if you don't know how to do some like HTML tricky stuff. So he made a tool to allow you like, what's the photo and what's the headline, and then the tool will package it together for you. That could fall into data journalism as well. Or a multifaceted website in which the reporting becomes the data. So I like to think of it from both angles. Data can be the source for data journalism. You might have a spreadsheet and find a story from it. Or it can be the tool with which you tell the story. And sometimes both are in play there. Taking a quick look, an example of data journalism done for mobile, BuzzFeed Spies in the Sky story. Did anyone see this? it was a pretty interesting story about FBI and Department of Homeland Security and how they're using other aircraft in order to track some things. So it's hard to simulate a look here, but essentially they have an in-depth story here about what was going on, and then they've used the data from that to really to create some of these interactive graphics here. These are different flight patterns that surveillance aircraft was taking. And you can see as time is going across here, sorry for the screen's like going crazy, different things are lighting up and kind of going away. So that's one kind of project. We won't spend too much time there. And then this other organization did a project in which readers can better understand some of the bureaucracy of medicine. So I will link to that too. And I'll put this presentation up online. And I'm sure you've all seen and interacted with different data journalism projects. So again, we'll be diving more into data journalism later in the semester, I think in a couple weeks actually. But just know that it's another tool in your toolbox for audience engagement, because there has been some data behind the way that we're doing interactive data journalism today, and how that's allowing for more audience engagement and more time spent with content. Okay, quickly, podcasting. We know from the this should say the State of News Media Report is where I got this from. But 1 in 5 U.S. adults age 12 or older has listened to some kind of podcast in the past month. And 6 years ago, that was only 12%. Who listens to podcasts here? Oh, great. What podcast do you listen to? Embedded? Ooh, I like Embedded. What else?
Millennium,
I like The Read. Millennium. What else? I'm sorry?
Reply all.
Reply All. I like Reply All as well. Great. Yeah, so that's very on trend for people our age. Listening to podcasts. And I would bet that if Pew limited their research to just, I would say like 25 to 40-year-olds, that it would be a much higher number as well. 36% of adults have listened to a podcast, up from 23% in 2010. And then also kind of as a subset of that, or a different way of looking at digital audio, is that streaming radio is up as well. So these are different avenues in which you can increase your audience engagement and increase the time spent with your content. Here's another way at looking at some of that information, and you can see since 2008 to 2016, how many more people are now listening to a podcast than they were before. Okay, email newsletters. Who subscribes to an email newsletter? What do you subscribe to? What is it? Oh, Skip, yeah. Uh-huh. What else?
I get the New York Times, like they have like
Oh, yeah.
New York news.
New York Times actually has like, I think 36 newsletters.
The one I get is basically it tells you about what's the headline, what's the news, and
Great. So they can be very targeted. Anne Freeman Weekly is one I subscribe to. Also, here's My Last Job, their email newsletter. So we know that, I'm just going to fly through some of this stuff now. There's a lot of different ways that you can use email newsletters, right? So you might create one to explain sports to non-fans. You might, Lean and Dunham's newsletter. BuzzFeed, Economist, New York Times reports, they all have really interesting way of repackaging their news content for an email audience, and there's a link there that you can click through on your own time. So essentially, it's just one more tool in your toolbox of ways that you can interact with your audiences. The point of all this, if you're like, why are we talking about this, is again, so that you can be thinking about some of these things throughout the semester, so that when we get to the point where we're actually creating things, now you have like, oh, maybe we want to do a podcast about this, or maybe we want to make a quick email newsletter about this. Okay, this is just like to get your feet wet a little bit, and then move on. Okay, social. I gotta fly through this stuff. Social has really been taking off. I don't have to explain this to you guys. You get it. The growth in social media for news is really powerful. If you're looking at the differences between 2016, the darker color, and 2013, the lighter color, Facebook has really taken off in the way that it's been used for news. This is the percentage of people on that platform who are likely to get news from that platform. So 70% of Reddit users actually get their news from Reddit, which is kind of interesting. 66% of Facebook users get their news from Facebook. We see companies that have been exploding in Facebook video in the way that they're producing it. So looking at summer 2015, CNN did just 35 Facebook videos. February 2016, 313. Facebook video, also, quick tip, Facebook video is it is the highest tool for engagement. It's a highest form of engagement on Facebook. The video is by far way more popular than photos, which are by far way more popular than text. Total engagement on Facebook videos per month, looking at June 2015 in the purple or pink color to February 2016 in that darker blue.
Can you define the engagement here? Because like Facebook can automatically play your videos. So like are these people like watching the whole thing? Are they just scrolling through it and
That's part of that dark web problem that I was telling you about. Yeah, so I would be willing to bet that these numbers are people who at least started the video, whether that was autoplay or not.
Actually, I think on Facebook it's 3 seconds. Even if it starts automatically, it's 3 seconds and that's as you do it.
Right. I agree with you. Here's a quick look at average length of videos. As we're thinking about mobile first and mobile publishing, you really got to keep things tight. Okay, so most of these are under 1 minute. I mean, how many videos do you sit there and watch more than 1 minute of on Facebook? I'm going to skip this. Things that you want to ask yourself as you're producing for social. And now here we start to think about Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, etc. Would I share this story on my feed? Do I actually care about this stuff? Is this the most compelling way to talk about it? What emotion am I trying to convey? Etc. You guys know you use these platforms, so you know what you would engage with as a user. Always be thinking about your end user, your end audience. What would they want to see? What would they want to interact with? And here are some quick rules. Platforms have a purpose. Don't forget the context. Here's an example of one story told 6 different ways across 6 different platforms. This is from Now This News. So we're looking at the Baltimore riots and Freddie Gray and all of that. On the left, we've got Facebook, all the way through an Instagram photo, a Snapchat, a Vine, etc. Here's another story. When gay marriage was legalized, told, this is 7 different ways now with a smartwatch thrown in. So that's the kind of stuff that you need to do, right? You can't take the same content and just publish it on 6 different platforms. You need to think about the way that you are putting it together. Rule 2, platforms are about people. Find out why your audience is coming to you. They're coming to you for very specific content. Give them that content. Don't just talk to your audience. Listen to what they're saying, even if they're not saying it to you. This is where data and analytics really comes into play, because people might say they're interested in one thing, but then you're seeing from the analytics that they're actually engaging with something else. Figure out what the platform is trying to tell you. If you're having trouble putting a full story on, doing some kind of like live video on Snapchat, maybe Snapchat isn't the best format for your live video. It's not about knowing what you're doing right, it's just as important to find and fix what you're doing wrong. Fail fast, move on. And you're going to have to experiment a little bit too. So this is the very last thing, by the way. So, for example, these 2 videos of the same thing, A and B, which one would you be more likely to watch? Oh. Interesting. Don't trust people, trust the analytics. Because what they found was that A had 80% more video views. I think because B just looked a little sad, right?
But it's like A. Like A is like, oh, this is some sort of dog surfing competition. And B is like, there's somebody's weird dog surfing.
True. I probably didn't set it up correctly. Maybe if I had like the full headline and everything here, that would have been better. Okay, so in the time we have left, we're going to talk about assignment number 1, which is creating an engaging piece of social content that complements a written story. So we've got 5 minutes left, so that's what we're going to use it for. And we're going to be doing.
I don't know if we have 5 minutes left. When's the next class for you folks? 2:30. So we may not.
We get out
I'm
at
so
10.
sorry. I thought we went to 20 after. I would have gone a lot faster. That was my fault.
We can maybe video record a description of this and give it to you on Facebook.
I apologize for that.
That's right.
I thought it was 20 after. Okay, yes, we'll give you more information.
You got enough on your plate. So we'll let you know more about this assignment. The assignment is actually in the document already, so you can read it over. It already gives you all the parameters, but we can elaborate on it in a mini video, and then you can post questions on Facebook for us. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay.
Professor,
Yes.
what do you say that you want us
No,
to
you're
do?
fine.
I'm sorry?
Yes, yeah. If you don't have anywhere to go,
Yeah, if you want to stay here, we can talk about it now. In fact, this is recording, so we can broadcast it.
They're not liberal. I think they're not liberal, but they're.
I want to get out of here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Email me and remind me then, okay? Yes.
When it says IG, that's Instagram, right?
Instagram, that's right. IG is Instagram.
We can also do a photo, right? Instead
Right.
of photo.
Hey, Jeremiah, you want to go over the assignment?
Yeah.
Okay, so for the folks who are here, we're going to go over the assignment. It's also being video recorded, so it can go out to the other folks as well. All right?
Great. Okay. So for assignment number 1, you're going to be creating a piece of engaging social content that complements a written story. And we're going to limit you to choosing one of 3 platforms. You can either do a Snapchat or Instagram story, so a story on either one, Snapchat or Instagram, a Facebook Live or a Periscope broadcast, or you can do a collection of Instagram photos. So those are the 3 platforms that we're going to, or 3 kind of buckets of platforms that we are going to point you toward. And you're going to choose one of them based on the story that you end up selecting as well. Let's jump to...
When you say a collection of photos, how do you do the Instagram collection of photos on Instagram?
I will explain. Good question.
It's a new feature that Instagram has, which is stories and collections.
Oh, is it like the new thing they added, like it's like Snapchat?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
They have-
So the goal here, again, is to create a piece of engaging social content that complements a written story. What does that mean? You are essentially going to, let me jump down to strategy here. You're going to find a new story to tell that lends itself to engaging content on one of those 3 platforms, or in one of those 3 buckets. The story that you tell is up to you. Okay, so we're giving you a lot of leverage, but I would point you in a direction that 1 is visual. It's pretty hard to tell a story that is not visual in a way on one of these platforms that are driven by visuals, right? So don't pick something that's like really dry or would need a lot of text explanation. Think of stories that are more visual in nature. Also think easy. This should not be like a complicated story, right? It could be a story about the African American Museum opening up soon. You might just be, you might do a small story on one of the monuments or something and talk to a park ranger or people who are visiting it. These can be like softer news stories, okay? We're not looking for any like hard-hitting journalism here, it's okay. But what you're gonna do is select a story that works for you, that is visual, and that you can easily kind of package into one of these 3 platforms. And as you're doing that, you want to ask yourself, would I share this story in my feed? Do I actually care about this story? How will I get users to finish and share? So again, use those as kind of guidelines to select your actual story topic. So you kind of have free range in terms of what your story is. And again, it can be softer, it can be more of a feature. But as you're selecting, just take note of those things. Like, would I actually watch a story about this? You know, like the Zaro guy at the airport, like, it's kind of interesting. I probably would like watch that story, and so maybe that's a story. But if you can't find anything that's not necessarily like hard news like that, that's really happening today, that's something you need to plan for, then find something that would work for that as well. That's totally fine. Again, this isn't a writing class, we're producing multimedia instead. That said, you will end up, and I'm kind of going over this out of order. Bear with me. You will end up writing a 300-word mini story in the form of a blog post using a mobile-first strategy. So strong headline, short paragraphs, concise writing, and you'll have to follow some basic journalism, including writing a lead, leading quotes, having a source. We're not saying like, oh, you need to have 5 sources or whatever. You know, talk to someone, right? Weave in their quote, etc. Follow AD style. Write your post on the website, on the WordPress website that we have. We'll make sure that everyone has access. And then you'll go back and embed whatever that extra platform content was that you created. Okay, so to take a step back, I'm finding a visual story. I'm going to report on it in some way, whether that's with Facebook Live or Periscope, Instagram or Snapchat story, or doing a collection of Instagram photos. And then, as I do that, I'm also going to write a 300-word mini story with it, and then go back and embed my content with it. I will give you tips for embedding later on. I'll define some of those. Questions so far?
For the word story, would you say the style of this, like, it's like blog style, like almost like the Huffington Post or like BuzzFeed type writing?
As in, is that okay?
Yeah. Or like,
I think we would prefer if it was more traditional
Okay.
news writing.
yeah.
But because we're not a writing class, like we're not going to be as concerned about your lead or whether you've worked in a quote as efficiently as possible. I'll be more concerned with like, hey, did you do a cool thing on Snapchat and did you get that working? And was Snapchat the best way to do what you wanted to do? That's kind of like where we're more concerned. So let me go over a couple of parameters for each of those 3 buckets of emerging platforms that you can select. You can do a Snapchat story or an Instagram story. For those, your final story length should be at least 60 seconds and should probably include some combination of still shot photos and video. So with a Snapchat video or Snapchat story, you can have both of them in there. Your final story should have both. And if you're on Snapchat, embrace the fun of it, right? You don't have to be too stuffy on Snapchat, though you should be professional. On Instagram, if you choose to do an Instagram story, typically those are a little more artistic, right? With Instagram photos. And then you want to make sure that you save it outside the app. So remember that they're both only there for 24 hours. So after you've kind of pieced your story together within the app, you definitely want to make sure that you save it. For Snapchat, if you don't know how to do this yet, there's a setting that you might have to update within the Snapchat app. You can update where it saves to. Mine originally just saved to my memories. That's part of the weird new Snapchat memories feature. You might have to change it to save to memories and camera roll. That's how you get it out of the app, okay? Because you're gonna wanna get it out of the app so that you can then put it somewhere else later on, okay? For Instagram, it's a lot easier. You just open your own story and then you tap on the 3 dots on the bottom right of the photo and then save it. And that will save your camera roll. So again, after you've produced your story of 60 seconds in either Instagram or Snapchat, you've got to get it out of the app so that you can save it. Otherwise, it'll disappear. Okay, if you do Facebook Live or Periscope as your emerging platform, then you need to produce live video for at least 3 minutes. We require a little more minute time length here because there's not as much editing to do, right? Like you just start broadcast and end broadcast. But there's a little more pre-planning that has to go on. If you're interviewing someone, you need to get the shot set up and make sure that you're both able to see the camera, etc. What else do we have there? Yeah, and then for Instagram, if you choose to do Instagram just kind of as your emerging platform and choose to use it more traditionally with photos, We just want you to use a collection of 10 photos. And collection here, I just mean like 10 photos in a row. So they should each have a caption as well. Humans of New York, I think, does this really well. You wouldn't have to write captions that long because that's more of like a story in one photo. Here we're thinking more about like a photo series and each one having a caption. Does that make sense for the kind of 3 different buckets? So you choose a bucket and then there are certain parameters within that bucket that you have to hit. And then you write a 300-word story and we'll go back and embed whatever it is that you did into the story.
So to summarize, it would be whether it's a multimedia environment like Snapchat or Instagram, right? A live element or Instagram, which is like a photo essay, which means you need to come up with photos that work together, are different enough so it's not the same thing 5 or 6 times, right? So those are the 3 different options. Okay. Any other questions? Because we need to let the next class in, I think, soon. All right. Great. We can take questions at Facebook. We will try to post some examples or give you some examples from Facebook that you can take a look at. And good luck. Feel free to send any questions. I have office hours starting now till 4, so if anyone wants to stop by, I'm up on the 3rd floor.
I'm really interested in like graphics and if that's going to be